President Trump, he's so unusual because he's more open than any US president that I can remember that tariffs are about politics as well as economics. It's his negotiating tactic of choice. He's most beautiful world. And Donald Trump does this with tariffs, otherwise known as import taxes. From 4 a.m. today, he slapped a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminium imports from anywhere, if you anger him, like Canada did. And remember that as we watch the EU trying to impress Trump over Ukraine, days after taking retaliatory action against the US over these trade sanctions.
Did you know that 5% of British steel and 6% of British aluminium is exported to America? That's over £400 million worth, now threatened by Trump's new 25% tariffs. And Starmer's grand response? A cool-headed approach, political speak for doing absolutely nothing. While European leaders are already planning countermeasures, Britain stands frozen, exposed, and vulnerable. The government calls this diplomacy. I call it surrender, and I'm going to show you exactly why this matters to every single person watching. Trump's most recent tariffs are an outright assault on thousands of British workers whose livelihoods are on the line, not just a theoretical economic strategy.
The United States and Donald Trump has announced he is going to double the tariffs imposed on Canadian steel and aluminium.
Governor of Ontario on the weekend saying that he would impose tariffs on electricity coming into the United States. And so Donald Trump, in response, has issued this extremely lengthy tweet, or 50% on steel and aluminium. He seems to be taking no notice of the turmoil in the markets, which have lost all of their gains.
Over £400 million worth of British business is now at stake because to the 25% tariffs placed on UK steel and aluminum exports. Surprisingly, though, this catastrophic setback has hardly been mentioned in the national discourse. Why? These tariffs have already brought the communities that are most at risk to its knees. Historic industrial heartlands like Sheffield, Yorkshire, Port Talbot, South Wales, and Scunthorpe, Lincolnshire, are already struggling with exorbitant energy bills and intense competition from around the world. These villages, where generations of families have centered their lives on steel manufacturing, are more than just statistics. As Starmer's government reacts with merely well-crafted press releases, they see their future go.
Take the 250 million tons of steel that last year went from Britain to the US. Tariffs are levied on the £400 million of UK steel as it goes through US customs. American firms can buy less, and in some cases there isn't a US alternative, so they hurt. But what does Britain do next? Well, not a lot. There's 26 billion euros of tit-for-tat sanctions on all of these things and more. The list of goods targeted is 99 pages long.
UK Steel was unreserved in their description of these levies as a devastating blow to our industry. They issued a clear warning: entire neighborhoods may suffer, jobs could be lost, and industries could close. The business secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, on the other hand, just made meaningless statements about how disappointed he was by Trump's choice, feeling let down. That must be very consoling to the steelworker who is going to lose his job. Trump's defense, national security concerns, highlights the ridiculousness of this circumstance. However, the US Navy's submarine fleet depends on specialized British steel goods, which are the subject of these charges. Nothing will reveal the flimsy justification for these actions if that doesn't. Britain is being penalized because Starmer lacks the courage to defend British interests, not because our steel poses a security threat to the United States. There is no greater glaring contrast than the European Union. Brussels has prepared 26 billion euros in retaliatory measures within hours of Trump's declaration. They displayed their teeth, made it apparent that there would be repercussions, and indicated that they would not be intimidated. Britain, we're adopting what the government refers to as a cool-headed approach. Politicians speak for doing nothing at all and expecting that the issue will miraculously go away. This problem exposes a devastating aspect of Britain's post-Brexit stance. We were promised a brave, self-governing country making profitable trade agreements all over the world. Rather, we are alone, exposed, and seemingly unable to protect our important businesses from foreign policies that prey on them. Trump's tariffs reveal that friendship is meaningless when economic interests are involved. Despite all the rhetoric about a special relationship between the United States and Britain, Trump's economic bullying completely overtook Starmer's leadership, which had previously boldly invited him for a state visit. The underlying naivete of Starmer's approach to international relations is shown by this spectacular diplomatic failure, positioning himself as the Trump whisperer who could secure favorable treatment for British industry while maintaining friendly connections with the controversial American leader. Was the Prime Minister's clear plan of action. He used a conciliatory tone, made personal phone calls, and invited the state to visit. All of this obedient diplomatic behavior was predicated on the idea that Trump would be benevolent in return. But when the chips were down, Trump immediately imposed 25% tariffs on British steel and aluminum, demonstrating just how much he cherished this alleged alliance. During their phone chat, Starmer reportedly pleaded for exclusions, which was an embarrassing stance for the head of a supposedly independent country, but his personal requests were ignored. Trump's blatant rejection of these diplomatic attempts exposes the harsh reality that in his universe, friendships are less important than displays of strength. There is no greater revealing contrast between the European Union's and Britain's responses. As Starmer's administration wrung its hands and only expressed disappointment, EU authorities promptly announced 26 billion euros in countermeasures against American exports. This bold move exemplifies the rapid, proportionate, and uncompromising response that Trump truly values. It's disappointing the US has today imposed global tariffs on steel and aluminium is a trite comment made by Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds, which sums up the government's ineffective position. Despite Reynolds' assertion that all options remain on the table, the absence of prompt, retaliatory actions betrays Britain's actual standing in the post-Brexit global hierarchy. The government's emphasis on negotiating a wider economic agreement and its self-proclaimed pragmatic approach are only euphemisms for indecisiveness and weakness. Jeremy Hunt, the Conservative Shadow Chancellor, correctly criticized this weak response and advocated for a more robust approach to safeguard British business. You know you've hit a diplomatic low point when even your political rivals are calling for you to be more tough. Thus, we find ourselves on the brink of a very unsettling reality. Unites Sharon Graham's efforts to declare steel critical national infrastructure highlight what our government should have known all along. This is about national security, not just economics. We're in trouble when union leaders make more sense than our elected politicians. The basic question is still unanswered. What is Starmer's strategy to safeguard British workers, even as the British Chambers of Commerce caution against retaliatory actions that would lead to a full-fledged trade war? In a diplomatic chess game, the steel communities are not pieces to be sacrificed. They are the foundation of British industry and are worthy of more than platitudes about special relationships and pragmatic approaches. The brutal reality is that Britain is currently adrift, too weak to oppose America, too alone to form an alliance with Europe, and too lost to determine its own path. Beyond political considerations, our employees want leadership that values them, not leadership that allows our manufacturing communities to fall apart while caving in to foreign powers.